The German officer fell to his knees in the French mud, not from the bullet that had just passed through his chest, but from what he saw in the scope before he died. 600 yards away, hidden in a pile of autumn leaves that smelled of wet earth and gun oil, a 24-year-old Montana farm boy named James Morrison watched through his rifle scope as the man collapsed. The leaves crunched softly beneath his body as he held position. His finger remained steady on the trigger. His breathing never changed. But here is what the history books never told you. That German officer, Hauptmann Klaus Zimmermann, had been hunting James for 6 weeks. He had killed 3 Canadian snipers already. He was the best shot in the entire Wehrmacht, an Olympic marksman from Berlin with 89 confirmed kills on the Eastern Front, a man who could split a playing card at 400 yards, a man who had survived 2 years in the frozen hell of the Russian front and lived to tell about it. And in that final second before James pulled the trigger on his Lee-Enfield rifle, Klaus had smiled. Because he finally knew the answer to the question that had haunted German high command since D-Day. Why were American farm boys and Canadian hunters killing Germany's finest soldiers like they were shooting deer back home? The answer lay in that pile of leaves, in the weathered hands of a young man who had never wanted to be a soldier, who had grown up with different dreams, who had learned to shoot not for war, but for survival on the high Montana plains, where winter could kill you just as dead as any bullet. The answer was simple, really. Americans like James Morrison did not fight like soldiers. They fought like hunters. And that made all the difference. The contrast: 4 years earlier, James Morrison had never killed a man. Hell, he had barely left Montana. The closest he had come to war was listening to Edward R. Murrow's radio broadcast while skinning coyotes in his father's barn. The smell of blood and fur mixing with cigarette smoke while voices from London crackled through static, talking about something called the Blitzkrieg. Words he could not pronounce describing places he had never heard of. A world that seemed impossibly far from the endless grasslands and big sky country he called home. His hands, the same hands that would later become known to German soldiers as the Quiet Death, were then only good for 3 things. 1. Shooting prairie dogs at 400 yards with his grandfather's .30-06 Winchester. 2. Breaking wild horses without breaking their spirit. And 3. Eating his mother's apple pie, which she baked every Sunday after church, still warm with cinnamon and butter melting into the crust. But that German officer in Normandy, the one lying face down in French mud with a single hole through his chest, he would change everything. Because this is not just a story about a rifle. It is not even really about war. This is a story about what makes an American deadly. Not the weapon in his hands, but the values in his heart, the promise. Over the next hour, I am going to tell you the true story of the Lee-Enfield No.4 Mark I, a rifle that British gunsmiths built by hand, that Canadian factories mass-produced with obsessive precision, and that American boys from places like Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas turned into the most feared weapon of World War II. You are going to hear about the Montana hunting guide who became a legend without ever wanting to be one, the German Olympic shooter who traveled 4,000 miles just to kill him, the rifle that never jammed, never failed, and never missed when it mattered most. And the day 2 men who had never met, who spoke different languages, who fought for different flags, faced each other across 700 yards of French countryside and discovered that honor exists even in war. This is the story of James Morrison and the rifle they called the Quiet Death. But before we get to that final duel in Normandy, you need to understand where boys like James came from, because that is the secret the Germans never figured out. If you or your father served in World War II, drop a comment below. This story belongs to your generation. Montana, September 1940. Havre, Montana. Population 3,624. 40 miles from the Canadian border. Close enough that on cold mornings you could see your breath mix with the steam from the Great Northern Railway locomotives that rolled through twice a day carrying wheat east and bringing newspapers west. The trains were the only connection to the outside world for most folks. They brought news of Europe's troubles. News that seemed as distant and unreal as the moon. James Robert Morrison turned 20 years old on September 1st, 1940, the exact same day Hitler invaded Poland. Not that James knew or cared much about European politics at the time. He was too busy doing what Montana boys did. Working. His morning started at 4:30. Not because anyone made him, but because the coyotes were out at dawn and the ranchers paid $5 a pelt. $5 was real money in 1940, enough to buy ammunition, tobacco, and maybe take a girl to the pictures on Saturday night if you were feeling flush. James could hear them before he could see them, their yips echoing across the high plains grassland that stretched flat and endless in every direction. The sound carried for miles in the thin air, sharp and lonely and wild. The sound of a 30-06 Winchester has a particular quality in Montana's thin air. Sharp, clean, like breaking a dry stick. James's rifle made that sound once, just once, 340 yards. The coyote dropped. His father, Robert Morrison Sr., watched from the porch of their two-room house, coffee cups steaming in the pre-dawn cold. The old man never said much, never had to, but he nodded once. Approval measured out like precious water in a drought. One shot, the old man would say, same as always. Learned that from my father. He learned it from his father. Morrison men do not waste bullets. We respect what we kill. That was not just philosophy. That was economics. Bullets cost money. Each one had to count. But more than that, it was about the only thing James's father had kept from the old country. The Morrisons were originally MacMorrisons from the Scottish Highlands, where they had been deer stalkers for the lairds. Gamekeepers who could drop a stag at 300 yards with an ancient rifle and open sights. Men who understood that hunting was not sport. It was craft. It was art. It was responsibility. They came over in 1885, brought three things: a rifle, a sense of honor, and the belief that if you are going to take a life animal or otherwise, you make it quick. No suffering, ever. James's grandfather used to say that you could tell a man's character by how he killed. A cruel man made it last. A careless man made it messy. But a good man, a righteous man, made it quick and clean. One shot, that is all you need if you know what you are doing. James knew what he was doing. He had been shooting since he was 8 years old. His grandfather had taught him on that same Winchester, the stock worn smooth by 3 generations of Morrison hands. Taught him to read wind by watching grass bend, to judge distance by knowing how big a mule deer looked at 200 yards versus 400, to control his breathing until his heartbeat slowed and the whole world narrowed down to the crosshairs and the target and nothing else. By the time James was 15, he could outshoot every man in Havre. By 18, he was guiding hunters from back east who paid good money to shoot elk in the Rockies. City men with expensive rifles who could not hit a barn door at 50 paces until James showed them how. But that morning in September 1940, as James walked back to the house with the coyote pelt slung over his shoulder, he had no idea that within 2 years, he would be using those same skills to kill men instead of animals. The world burns. While James was shooting coyotes in Montana, the world was tearing itself apart. By October 1940, London was burning. Every night, German Heinkel bombers dropped hundreds of tons of explosives on British cities. The Blitz, they called it. The newspapers showed pictures of entire city blocks reduced to rubble, of children sleeping in underground stations while bombs fell overhead, of St. Paul's Cathedral standing defiant amid the flames, somehow untouched, while everything around it burned. France had fallen in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The mighty French army, which had held Germany at bay for 4 years in the last war, had been swept aside like autumn leaves. The Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg had torn through the Maginot Line, through the Low Countries, through everything. Panzer tanks rolling across farmland that still held the bones of men who had died fighting Germans a generation before. Poland was crushed. Norway occupied. Denmark surrendered in 4 hours. 4 hours. An entire country gone in less time than it took to drive from Havre to Great Falls. And Britain stood alone. Franklin Roosevelt, speaking on the radio that fall, warned Americans, "We cannot save freedom in Europe without ultimately fighting for it," he said. His voice was calm but urgent, like a doctor telling you bad news but trying to keep you from panicking. The arsenal of democracy, he called America. We would build the weapons, send the supplies, do everything except fight. Not yet anyway. But most Americans, including James Morrison, wanted nothing to do with your fights problems. Not again, not after what happened in 1917, not after the Argonne Forest and Belleau Wood and all those other places where American boys had gone to bouillir in muddy French trenches for reasons nobody could quite explain afterward. James's father had fought in the Argonne. Never talked about it, would not talk about it. His face would go hard and distant if anyone asked, and he would find somewhere else to be. But James had found the Purple Heart in a cigar box under papers in the back of a closet, like his father was ashamed of it, or maybe just wanted to forget. So when James's half-brother Thomas wrote from Canada that he had enlisted in the Canadian Army, James's father exploded. "Fool boy is going to get himself killed for nothing," the old man shouted, crumpling the letter in his fist. "Just like I almost did. For what? For nothing. For some politicians in Washington and London who sit in comfortable offices while boys die in the mud." But James's mother, Margaret, a quiet woman who rarely disagreed with her husband, picked up that letter and pressed it flat against the kitchen table. "Thomas believes in something," she said softly. "Can you fault a man for that?" She had a way of saying things that made you reconsider, made you think. She had been a school teacher before she married, back when women who married were expected to quit teaching. But she had never really stopped being a teacher. Still corrected James's grammar. Still made him read books. Still asked him questions that made him think about things he would rather not think about. James kept that letter, read it 17 times before he memorized it. Thomas was 6 years older, his half-brother from his mother's first marriage to a French-Canadian man who had died in a logging accident up in Saskatchewan. Thomas had always been more like an uncle than a brother, someone who visited twice a year, someone who sent birthday cards with Canadian stamps, someone who seemed to live in a different world. But that letter was different. Thomas wrote about Hitler and the Nazis and what they were doing in Europe, about concentration camps and persecution and invasion, about how someone had to stop them, about how the Canadians were building something special. Sniper units, he called them. They need men who can shoot, real shooters, men like us, men like us. James read those words over and over, men like us, as if James belonged to some special brotherhood of riflemen that transcended borders and flags. As if the skills his grandfather had taught him skills meant for feeding a family and earning a living might be needed for something larger, something more important. He did not know what to think about that. 2 years passed, the seasons turned, winter came and went, spring brought new grass and newborn calves. Summer burned hot and dry. Autumn painted the aspens gold. James kept working, kept shooting, kept reading news about battles with names he could not pronounce in places he had never heard of. Tobruk, El Alamein, Stalingrad. Names that would later be written in history books, but then were just words in newspapers that arrived 2 days late on the train. The war seemed distant, unreal, something happening to other people in other places. Then August 19th, 1942, a telegram arrived. Western Union, yellow paper. The boy who delivered it could not have been more than 16, too young to enlist yet. He handed it to James's mother and waited awkwardly on the porch, not knowing if he should stay or go. She gave him a quarter and closed the door. Her hands shook when she opened it. Thomas Mackenzie Morrison, stop wounded. Dieppe operation, stop critical condition. Stop, just those words, nothing more. As if a man's life could be summarized in a handful of words clacking out of a telegraph machine somewhere far away. Dieppe. James had read about it in the newspaper 3 days later. Canadian troops, mostly Canadian, launched a raid on occupied France, an attempt to test German defenses, to prove that an invasion was possible, to boost morale. It was a disaster. Of 5,000 Canadians who landed on those beaches, 3,600 were killed, wounded, or captured. The Germans were waiting, had been waiting. The element of surprise, which is everything in war, was gone before the first landing craft touched sand. Machine guns cut down men before they could even reach the seawall. Tanks got stuck on the rocky beach. The whole operation was over in 9 hours. 9 hours of hell. Thomas survived, barely. Machine gun fire across his chest and shoulder. 3 bullets, 2 broken ribs, collapsed lung. He had lain on that beach for 17 hours playing dead while Germans walked past him shooting anyone who moved. Playing dead while his friend bled out around him. Playing dead while the sun baked down and thirst drove him half mad and every breath felt like knives in his chest. He survived because a German officer near the end of the day had seen him blink, had walked over, had looked down at him, and had walked away without shooting. Maybe the officer was tired of killing. Maybe he had used up his quota of death for one day. Maybe he saw something in Thomas's eyes that reminded him of someone. His brother, his son, himself. War is full of these small mercies that no one can explain. But here is what the telegram did not say. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived, handwritten, shaky, from Thomas, from a hospital in England. James's mother read it first, sitting at the kitchen table while coffee grew cold in her cup. Then she handed it to James without a word, just handed it to him and walked outside, and James knew it was bad before he even unfolded the thin paper. The handwriting was barely legible. Thomas's right hand was damaged. He had written with his left, each word a struggle. Jimmy, the letter began. Always Jimmy, never James. No one else called him that except Thomas. I saw things no man should see. Boys from Regina, from Toronto, from Vancouver, dead in the sand, 20 years old, most of them. Kids, really. Kids who should have been worrying about girls and moms and what to do with their lives. Instead, they died on a French beach far from home for reasons most of them probably did not fully understand. But I also saw something else. I saw what happens when you face evil and you are not ready. The Germans were ready. We were not. They had snipers who had fought in Poland and France and Russia. Men who could shoot a cigarette out of your mouth at 400 yards. Men who had been doing this for years. Men who were professional killers in a way we were not. We had farmers with rifles. Good men, brave men, but not prepared, not trained, not ready for what they faced. But now the Canadians are building sniper schools, real ones, training hunters, men who grew up with rifles who understand patience and wind and distance, men who do not need to be taught how to shoot, just how to fight. They need Americans too, boys from Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, places where men still know how to shoot, where hunting is not a hobby but a way of life. I cannot fight anymore, Jimmy. Doctor says my shoulder is finished, says I will never lift my right arm above my head again, says I am lucky to be alive. Maybe he is right. I do not feel lucky, but you can. I am not asking you to avenge me. I am not asking you to be a hero. I am asking you to finish what we started, because somebody has to stop them, and it might as well be men who know what they are doing. Your brother Thomas. James read that letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket over his heart. The decision. James sat on the porch that night, October wind cutting through his jacket, sharp and cold, and smelling of snow coming down from the north. The kind of wind that makes you think about winter and survival and mortality. That letter felt like it was burning a hole through his shirt, through his skin, into his heart. His father had not spoken to him in 3 days. Not since James mentioned Thomas's letter. Not since James had said the word enlist. The old man would not look at him, would not acknowledge him, would leave the room when James entered. It was like James had already died and his father was practicing mourning him. His mother sat beside him on the porch, silent at first, just sitting there in the cold dark while stars came out overhead, brittle and sharp and impossibly distant. Your father is scared, she finally said. He lost friends in France. Good men, boys he grew up with. He does not want to lose his sons. Thomas is already hurt. And you think going over there will make it better? James was quiet for a long moment, searching for words that would not come. Then he said something his mother would remember for the rest of her life. Mom, remember when I shot my first elk, I was 12. You made me sit with it while it died. You said if you are going to take a life, you make sure it is for something important. You make it quick, and you never forget what you did. She nodded, eyes glistening in the starlight. Thomas is right. Somebody has got to stop them. And if it has got to be somebody, I would rather it be someone who makes it quick. Someone who does not make them suffer. Someone who respects the kill. His mother was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and took his hand, held it tight. Her hands were rough from years of farm work. Strong hands, hands that had delivered calves and set broken bones and held children through fevers and buried a husband she loved. She did not cry. Morrison women did not cry. But her voice was thick when she spoke. If you go, you come back. Promise me that. I will try. No. Promise me. Say the words. I promise, James said. I will come back. It was a lie. They both knew it. You cannot promise to survive a war. But sometimes we need the lie more than we need the truth. 2 weeks later, James loaded his grandfather's 3006 Winchester into his father's 1936 Ford pickup, added $73 in cash saved from 2 years of hunting and guiding, a photograph of his parents, 3 changes of clothes, a Bible his mother had given him, and that letter from Thomas creased now from being folded and unfolded so many times. He drove north. The road was dirt most of the way, rutted and rough, kicking up dust that hung in the air behind him like smoke. He crossed into Canada at the Coots border crossing on October 17, 1942. The border guard, an older man with kind eyes, looked at James's birth certificate and asked him where he was going. To enlist, James said. The guard looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Good luck, son. Give them hell. James's father never said goodbye, never came out of the barn when James loaded the truck, never looked up when the engine started, never waved when James drove away. But James found a note tucked into his rifle case. He did not find it until that night in a cheap hotel room in Lethbridge, Alberta. The note was in his father's cramped handwriting, each letter formed carefully, slowly by a man who had not finished past 8th grade. 1 shot, 1 kill. Come home, son. That was the last communication James had with his father for 3 years. By the time James returned to Montana in the summer of 1945, his father had been dead for 18 months. Heart attack while feeding Haswell in February 1944. Died in the snow. The neighbor found him the next morning, frozen solid, still holding the feed bucket. James would spend the rest of his life wondering if the stress of having 2 sons go to war had killed his father. Wondering if the old man had died thinking James hated him for not saying goodbye. Wondering if he could have saved him somehow by staying home. But on that cold October morning in 1942, as James crossed the border into Alberta, he did not know any of that. All he knew was that somewhere across an ocean, men were dying. And if he could shoot like his grandfather taught him, maybe, just maybe, he could save a few of them. That decision, made on a Montana porch in October 1942, would eventually lead to 103 German soldiers' deaths, and one of the most feared rifle and sniper combinations in World War II. But first, James Morrison had to learn how to be more than just a hunter. He had to learn how to be a ghost. Vernon, British Columbia, November 1942. The training camp sat in a valley surrounded by pine forests where morning fog rolled down from the mountains and froze on your rifle barrel. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet earth and something else. Something James could not quite name at first. Then he realized. It was the smell of fear mixed with determination. 43 men standing in formation breath, steaming in the cold, each one knowing that most of them would not make it through training. James Morrison stood among them. 31 Canadians. 12 Americans who had crossed the border like he had. Farm boys and hunters and trappers. Men who knew how to shoot but did not yet know how to kill. There was a difference. James would learn that soon enough. The man who would teach him that difference walked down the line that first morning. Sergeant William Fraser, 35 years old, with a face that looked like it had been carved from Highland granite and a temper to match. Red beard, scar across his left cheek from a German bayonet in the First World War. He carried a coffee mug in one hand, steam rising from it like smoke from a dragon's nostrils. He walked slowly, deliberately, looking at each man like he was inspecting cattle at auction, judging, measuring, finding most of them wanting. When he got to James, he stopped. You, where you from? Havre, Montana, Sergeant. Montana. Fraser took a sip of coffee. You ever kill anything? Coyotes? Prairie dogs? Elk. Elk at what range? 400 yards, Sergeant. Fraser studied him. Wind. 10 mile per hour, crosswind. Sergeant, from the northwest. Correction. 2 inches right at that range, Sergeant. Maybe 2.5, depending on the load. Fraser almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched like he was fighting against it. You will do, he said. Then louder to everyone, his voice carrying across the parade ground like a whip crack. Gentlemen, a sniper who misses is just a murderer with bad aim. For the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you not to miss. And he meant it, the breaking. The training broke men. Not physically, though. Crawling through frozen mud for 6 hours while instructors walk past you, sometimes stepping on your back, will break your body down pretty good. James learned what it meant to be cold in a way he had never been cold before. Montana cold was clean and dry. British Columbia cold was wet and penetrating, the kind that gets into your bones and stays there. No, the training broke men mentally. Because sniping is not about being a good shot. Any farm boy can hit a target at 200 yards if you give him enough practice. James had met city boys who could shoot well enough after a few months of training. Shooting is a mechanical skill. You learn the fundamentals. You practice. You get better. Sniping is about something else entirely. It is about patience. Lying in the same position for 8 hours without moving. Your muscles screaming, bladder full, insects crawling on your face into your ears across your lips, and you cannot move, cannot even blink too fast. Because movement is death. Movement gets you seen, and getting seen gets you killed. It is about mathematics, wind speed, temperature, humidity, altitude, barometric pressure, the Coriolis effect at extreme range. Every variable changes where your bullet goes. You have to calculate all of it in your head in seconds, while your heart is pounding and your hands are shaking and someone is shooting back at you. It is about fieldcraft, moving 500 yards in 4 hours without being seen, using grass shadow terrain the angle of the sun, becoming part of the landscape, becoming invisible, not hiding exactly but blending so completely that the human eye slides right past you even when looking directly at you. And it is about psychology. Knowing that when you pull that trigger, you are not shooting at a target. You are killing a man, maybe a father, maybe a son, someone who woke up that morning thinking about home and the girl waiting for him and what he would eat for dinner. And you have to live with that, have to sleep at night knowing that somewhere a mother is getting a telegram about her boy who is never coming home because of you. Out of 44 men who started training, only 16 graduated. The others broke, some physically. One man shattered both knees during a night infiltration exercise. Another broke his back, falling from a tree during an observation drill. But most broke mentally, woke up one morning and could not do it anymore, could not face another day of the cold and the hunger and the exhaustion and the knowledge of what they were being trained to become. James Morrison was one of the 16 who made it. But the real change, the moment when everything shifted, happened on week 6. When Sergeant Fraser introduced them to their rifles, the rifle room, December 1942, the armory at Vernon. Fraser led them into a concrete building that smelled of gun oil and wood varnish, scents that would later remind James of safety, of precision, of trust. Scents that would become as familiar to him as his own sweat. Laid out on tables were 16 rifles, not just any rifles. Lee-Enfield No.4 Mark I with a T designation. The T stood for telescopic, but it meant so much more than that. Fraser picked one up, held it like it was a sacred object, like it was the Ark of the Covenant, and he was a priest performing a holy ritual. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, and his voice had a reverence James had never heard from the hard-bitten sergeant before. "What you are looking at is the culmination of 300 years of British gun-making tradition, combined with the precision of Holland, and Holland the finest gunsmiths in London, and the industrial capacity of Canada." He handed one to James. The weight hit him first. 9 pounds, 11 ounces. Heavier than his Winchester, but perfectly balanced. The balance point was just forward of the trigger guard. It settled into his shoulder like it belonged there, like it had been made for him specifically. The wood came next. Dark walnut hand fitted smooth as riverstone under his fingers. You could feel the hours of work in that wood. Someone had shaped it, sanded it, fitted it to the metal with such precision that there were no gaps, no rough edges, no compromises. The metal was blued steel, precisely machined cold against his palm. The bolt moved like silk, smooth and precise with just enough resistance to let you know it was there. The trigger had a clean break at about 4 pounds. No creep, no grittiness, just perfect. And the scope, the number 32 telescopic sight offset to the left to allow the bolt to be worked without removing your cheek from the stock. Hand-aligned by craftsmen who had spent their whole lives building custom hunting rifles for English nobility, who paid more for a rifle than most men earned in a year. This rifle, Fraser continued, was one of 26 selected from 1,300 manufactured at Long Branch, Ontario. Less than 2% make the cut. Why? He looked directly at James. "Morrison, tell me what makes a good sniper rifle." James thought carefully. He knew this was a test. Everything was a test. Accuracy, Sergeant. Wrong, James blinked, felt his face flush. He hated being wrong. Any rifle can be accurate, Fraser said. What makes a good sniper rifle is three things. He held up one finger. Reliability. When you are lying in mud, in rain, and snow after you have crawled 3 miles and waited 8 hours for your shot, the rifle works. Always. No jams, no failures, no excuses. Your life depends on it. Your partner's life depends on it. The lives of the men you are protecting depend on it. Second finger. Consistency. Same zero at 200 yards and 600 yards. Same point of impact, whether it is 40 degrees or 80 degrees. Same everything every time. Because you do not get to test fire before you take the shot. You get one chance. It has to be right the first time. Third finger, speed. Because sometimes you do not get one shot. Sometimes you need two. Sometimes three. And the difference between life and death is how fast you can work that bolt. How fast you can acquire a second target. How fast you can adjust for a miss and fire again before the enemy realizes where you are. He handed James the rifle designated T-1847, serial number stamped on the receiver. Proof marks from London, made in Canada, refined in Britain, now yours. James looked through the scope for the first time. The world changed. Everything became clear, focused, close. He could see individual blades of grass 300 yards away. He could see the grain in a wooden post 400 yards distant. He could see a bird land on a fence rail 500 yards away and count its tail feathers. This was not just a rifle. This was an extension of his will, an extension of his intention. With this, he could reach out across impossible distances and touch someone, for good or ill, to save or to kill. The power of it was intoxicating and terrifying. The quirk, but here's what Sergeant Fraser did not tell them. Every Lee-Enfield has a personality. Some shoot high, some shoot left. Some are finicky about ammunition, grouping tight with one load and scattering with another. Some hate cold weather and need to be warmed before they shoot true. Some prefer to be held tight to the shoulder. Others like a lighter touch. James discovered his rifle's secret during his first live fire session. 200 yards, 5 rounds. He aimed center mass on a man-sized target. All 5 rounds hit 2 inches right of center. Consistent, precise, but not where he was aiming. 300 yards. Same thing. Dead center. 400 yards. Dead center. 500 yards. Dead center. 600 yards. Dead center. Fraser came over, looked at the targets, looked at James, raised an eyebrow. She does not like close range, Fraser said. Too intimate for her. But give her distance, give her room to breathe, and she will never let you down. Over the next 6 weeks, James fired 2,400 rounds through T-1847. He learned her rhythm, her preferences, where she liked to be held, how she reacted to different weather, the way she shot a touch high in the morning cold and came back to zero as the metal warmed, the way she preferred British ammunition over American, the way she liked to be cleaned with specific attention to the chamber and the crown of the barrel. And the rifle learned him, learned the way he breathed, the way he squeezed the trigger, the rhythm of his heartbeat, the steadiness of his hands. By graduation in February 1943, James could group 3 shots within 2 inches at 600 yards, could cycle the bolt and fire 5 aim shots in 7 seconds, could field strip and clean the rifle blindfolded in under 3 minutes, could maintain 0 accuracy after carrying the rifle through mud, water, and snow. But the most important thing happened on the last day of training. When Fraser assigned him a spotter, the partnership, Robert Chen, age 22, born in Vancouver to Chinese immigrant parents who ran a grocery store on East Hastings Street. Bobby, everyone called him Bobby. He had been studying engineering at University of British Columbia when Pearl Harbor happened. He enlisted the next day to prove his loyalty, despite the fact that the Canadian government had just interned his aunt and uncle in camps because they were Japanese. Bobby was Chinese, but paranoia does not make distinctions. Fear does not care about facts. Bobby was small, 5'7", 140 pounds, soaking wet. He looked like a strong wind would blow him away. Looked like he should be behind a desk somewhere not in a combat zone. But he had an accountant's mind and a hunter's patience. Could do calculus in his head. Could judge distance by eye within 10 yards. Could read terrain like other men read newspapers. "You shoot," Fraser told them. "He spots. He reads wind. He watches your back. He finds your targets. You are married now. Act like it." James looked at Bobby skeptically. The kid looked too young, too small, too soft. Bobby looked back and said, "I can do math faster than you can breathe. You want to hit something at 800 yards in a crosswind? You need me." He was right. That first day working together, Bobby called out targets James had not even seen, calculated wind drift while James was still trying to judge distance, spotted for corrections before James could ask for them. By the end of the first week, they moved like one organism. Bobby would whisper a range and wind call. James would adjust and fire. No wasted words, no hesitation, just smooth, efficient killing. Over the next 2 years, Bobby would save James's life 6 times. Once by spotting a German patrol that James had missed. Once by pulling him down a split second before a sniper round passed through the space where his head had been. 4 times by making wind calls that meant the difference between a hit and a miss, between mission success and getting them both killed. And James would save Bobby twice. Once by killing 3 German soldiers who had stumbled onto their position. Once by carrying him 2 miles through enemy territory after Bobby took shrapnel in both legs. But on that cold February day in 1943, as they shipped out to England, all James knew was this: he had a rifle that never failed, and a partner who never quit. Everything else was just details. England, the waiting. March 1943 to June 1944. 15 months of training, waiting, preparing. Advanced courses in urban sniping, counter-sniper tactics, working with artillery spotters, night operations, vehicle interdiction, prisoner snatch missions, every possible scenario they might face, and waiting, always waiting, for the invasion that everyone knew was coming, but no one knew when. James spent those months becoming intimate with Tu-1847. He carved notches into the stock for practice kills at long range. Not enemy soldiers, not yet, but practice targets that represented enemy soldiers, getting his mind ready for what was coming. He wrote letters home, to his mother mostly. His father never wrote back. James did not know if the old man was reading the letters or burning them unopened. Then December 1943 brought news that broke something inside James he did not know could break. His father was dead, heart attack, died in the snow feeding cattle. James requested leave to go home. Request denied. Too close to the invasion. All leave canceled. He sat in the barracks that night holding the telegram, and Bobby sat with him. Did not say anything, just sat there. Sometimes that is all you can do for someone. Just be there. If you're enjoying this story about how American values and precision transformed warfare, share it with someone who served. This history belongs to all of us. Day +1, Juno Beach. June 7, 1944. The beach smelled of salt blood and burning oil. Wrecked landing craft dotted the sand like broken toys. Bodies lay where they had fallen, covered with tarps because there was not time yet for proper burial. James Morrison crawled off landing craft infantry 423 into 3 feet of cold seawater. Lee-Enfield T-1847, wrapped in canvas and held above his head. The water was shockingly cold. It took his breath away, made his legs numb almost instantly. Bobby Chen came behind him, carrying the spotting scope binoculars and their shared ammunition. 100 rounds of .303 British, carefully selected for consistency. They had practiced this, trained for it, run through it 100 times on English beaches. But nothing prepares you for the real thing. The sound was the first shock, not the rifle shots from training. Real combat sounds like continuous thunder, like being inside a drum while someone beats it. Rifle fire and machine gun fire and artillery and explosions and men screaming and engines roaring and metal tearing. All of it at once. All of it constant. No breaks, no silence. Just overwhelming noise that made thinking almost impossible. The second shock was the smell. Cordite, yes. That sharp chemical smell they knew from training. But also worse things. Things James had only smelled on a farm during slaughter season. The smell of open bodies, of blood and ball and shit and death. They pushed inland with the Regina Rifles Regiment moving through hedgerows. Bocage, the French called it. Thick walls of earth and vegetation that divided Norman farmland into a maze-like series of corridors. Each field a potential kill box. Each hedgerow hiding potential death. Perfect ambush country. Perfect sniper country. Their orders were simple. Secure us a farmhouse overlooking Carpiquet airfield. Provide overwatch for infantry advance. Eliminate enemy officers and observers. They reached their position at 1400 hours. By 1427, James had killed his first man. The first kill. The German was maybe 400 yards away, up in a church tower, watching the Canadian advance through binoculars. Bobby spotted him first. Contact. 11 o'clock. Church tower. Second window from top. Range 425. James found him in the scope. Young man, maybe 25. Blonde hair, good fieldcraft. He had positioned himself back in the shadows, not silhouetted against the window. Smart, but he had made one mistake. He had let the sun glint off his binoculars. Just for a second, just a flash. But that was enough. When James asked, his voice was steady despite his heart hammering. 5 miles per hour, left to right. James made the adjustment. One click right on the scope. Deep breath in, halfway out. Hold. The world narrowed to the crosshairs and the target. Nothing else existed, not the war, not the noise, not Bobby beside him, just the target. The German moved, leaned forward, binoculars up to his eyes looking right at their position. Had he seen them, Bobby whispering? He is calling it in. Shoot! James pulled the trigger. The Lee-Enfield kicked against his shoulder. Familiar, almost comforting, like an old friend tapping you on the arm. The crack of the shot echoed across the farmland. In the scope, James saw the German's head snap back, the binoculars falling, the body slumping forward against the window frame, then sliding out of sight. Silence, or what passed for silence in a combat zone. Then Bobby, hit. He is down. James cycled the bolt, smooth, fast, automatic, chambering another round even though he did not need it. He waited for something, some feeling. Guilt, horror, remorse, something. But all he felt was relief that he had hit what he aimed at, and a strange distant sadness, like mourning someone you never knew. You good, Bobby asked. James nodded. Yeah, I am good, but he was not. Not really. Because killing a coyote and killing a man are very different things. A coyote does not have a mother waiting at home, does not have a girl he writes letters to, does not have dreams about what he will do after the war. That night, James wrote in his diary, one of only 3 entries he would make during the entire war. June 7, 1944. I killed a man today. German observer. Church tower. 425 yards. Clean shot. I made it quick. That is what grandfather would have wanted. 1 shot, 1 kill. No suffering. He never wrote about the nightmares that started that night, or the fact that for 3 days afterward, every time he closed his eyes, he saw that German soldier's head snap back. The escalation. Over the next 6 weeks, James Morrison killed 17 more German soldiers, machine gunners, officers, forward observers. 1 German sniper who had been terrorizing Canadian positions for days. Each time, clean shot, quick death, no suffering. The Regina Rifles started calling him Ghost. Not because he was scary, but because he was invisible. He would be there one moment, gone the next, and somewhere a German would fall. But then late July, something changed. Canadian intelligence brought in a captured German Unteroffizier, a sergeant from the 12th SS Panzer Division. Young, maybe 19, looked even younger. Looked like he should be in high school, not fighting a war. During interrogation, the sergeant mentioned something that made the intelligence officer sit up straight. They brought in a specialist from the Eastern Front, Oberleutnant Zimmermann, Olympic shooter, 1936 Berlin Games. 90 kills in Russia. His mission is to hunt Canadian snipers. The intelligence officer leaned forward. Why Canadians specifically? The German sergeant laughed. Bitter, tired. The laugh of someone who has seen too much death. Because your snipers are killing our officers faster than we can replace them. Every day, another company commander dead. Another forward observer shot. Always Canadians. Always clean shots. High command is, how do you say, panicking. That information filtered up the chain. Eventually reached Captain Hughes, the sniper platoon commander, who called in James and Bobby. "We have a problem," Hughes said. He spread a map on the table, marked with red X's, each X representing a Canadian sniper killed in the last week. German counter-sniper specialist, trained at their elite school, been operating in your sector. 3 Canadian snipers killed in 7 days, all headshots from extreme range, all in your division's sector. Bobby asked the question both of them were thinking. How do we find him? Hughes looked at James directly. We do not find him, Morrison. We let him find you. We set a trap. And you are the bait. James looked at the map, at the X's marking dead men, good men, trained men. And somewhere out there in those hedgerows and farmhouses and church towers was a German who was better than all of them. A man who had survived 2 years on the Eastern Front, who had killed 90 men, who was now hunting James specifically. For the first time since landing in France, James Morrison felt something he had not felt since he was a child. He felt fear. The trap, August 2nd, 1944, destroyed farmhouse 3 kilometers west of Caen. The plan was simple. Simple plans are usually the best plans, Fraser had told them in training. The more complicated the plan, the more ways it can fall apart. James would set up in an obvious position, good sight lines, decent cover, the kind of position a competent sniper would choose. Bobby would hide 200 yards away with a radio. When Klaus took the shot at James and missed because James would have a dummy in his place, Bobby would triangulate the shot. Call in artillery, problem solved, simple. Except Klaus Zimmermann had not survived 90 kills by being stupid. James set up his position at dawn, first light painting the sky pink and gold, birds singing their morning songs unaware or uncaring that men were about to die in their territory. He arranged his helmet and pack to look like a sniper from 600 plus yards, added his jacket stuffed with grass to give it shape. From a distance in the right light, it looked convincing. Then he moved 30 feet away into better cover and waited. 8 hours passed. The sun moved across the sky in its eternal arc. James's legs cramped. His bladder filled until it ached. Sweat ran down his back despite the cool morning. Flies found him crawled on his face into his ears. He let them. Movement is death. Bobby's voice in his ear, barely a whisper. Movement, 1 o'clock, 650 yards. James did not move, did not even adjust his scope. Waited. Then the shot came. The crack of a rifle. Not particularly loud. Not particularly close, but unmistakable. A bullet smashed into the wall 6 inches from James's actual head. Not the dummy, his position. The real position. James rolled left as a second shot hit where he had been lying. Stone chips exploding. One caught him across the cheek, drawing blood. Move, move, Bobby screaming into the radio. He has got us. James grabbed his rifle, ran. Training took over. Do not think, just move. Get to cover. Stay alive. Third shot, hit Bobby's pack. Blew apart his canteen, water spraying. Fourth shot, missed by inches as James dove behind a stone wall. Then silence. James peered through a crack in the wall scope, up searching, heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Blood on his face mixing with sweat. Nothing, no movement, no muzzle flash, no indication of where the shots had come from. The man was a ghost. Bobby crawled up beside him, breathing hard. How did he know? James looked at the wall where that first shot had hit. The bullet had struck exactly where his head would have been if he had been lying in his planned position. Not a warning shot, not a miss, a perfect shot. If James had not moved 30 feet from his decoy. He is better than me, James said quietly. What he is better than me. He outthought me, outpositioned me. Bobby stared at him. So what do we do? James looked at the bullet hole in the wall, looked at the blood on his hand from his cut cheek, looked at the ruined canteen spilling water onto French soil, then smiled, a grim smile. The smile of a man who has just realized the game he is playing. We get better. Cat and mouse. For the next 4 weeks, August into early September, Klaus Zimmermann and James Morrison hunted each other. Neither knew the other's name yet. Intelligence had identified Klaus, but James only knew him as the German, the specialist, the Olympic shooter. Klaus knew James only as the Canadian ghost, the American voice, the one who never missed, but they knew each other's style. James learned that Klaus preferred morning shots. Sun behind him, targets backlit. Smart. Klaus learned that James favored late afternoon positions. Golden hour light shadows lengthening. Also smart. James learned that Klaus used decoys brilliantly. Helmets on sticks. Dummy positions that drew fire. Klaus learned that James never took the obvious shot. Always waited. Always patient. James learned that Klaus was willing to wait days for the perfect opportunity. Klaus learned that James always had an escape route plan. Never trapped himself. They each killed other snipers during this time thinking they might be their opponent. James killed 3 German snipers. All clean shots. All from positions Klaus would have approved of. Klaus killed 2 Canadian snipers from other units. Both headshots. Both from extreme range. But they never got a clear shot at each other. It was like 2 chess grandmasters playing by mail. Each move careful, considered, countered. Each studying the other's game's learning patterns, anticipating responses. The tension built. Days turned into weeks. The hedgerows of Normandy became their personal battlefield. A deadly game played across fields and farms and ruined villages. Then September brought the breakout. Allied forces streaming out of Normandy. The German line collapsing. Retreat turning into rout in some sectors. And James Morrison moved with the advance, always hunting, always watching for the one German who mattered. The Scheldt, October 1944. The Scheldt Estuary. Netherlands. If you have never been to the Netherlands, picture this. Flat. Perfectly flat. Farmland below sea level protected by dikes. Raised embankments that held back the ocean. The Germans had flooded sections deliberately. Turned the battlefield into a maze of water channels, muddy fields, and narrow causeways. For most soldiers, nightmare terrain. Exposed, nowhere to hide. Every movement visible from miles away. For snipers, paradise. Because there was no cover. Anywhere. Every German soldier moving on those dikes was visible from 800+ yards. And the Lee-Enfield could reach 800 yards. James and Bobby were assigned to overwatch for the assault on Woensdrecht, a small town on a crucial causeway. Their position was a church tower with clear sight lines across 3 kilometers of open ground. For 6 days, James Morrison hunted. Day 1, 5 kills. All German soldiers attempting to cross causeways. All clean shots. All dropped where they stood. Bobby called ranges. James adjusted. Fired. The rhythm became almost meditative. Range. Wind. Fire. Bolt. Repeat. Day 2. 3 kills, including 1 officer identified by binoculars. The officer had been directing troops from what he thought was a safe distance. 700 yards. He was wrong about the distance being safe. Day 3. 7 kills. Long-range work. 600 to 750 yards. Testing the limits of the rifle. Testing the limits of his skill. The Lee-Enfield never failed. Not once. Day 4. 2 kills. Counter-sniper duel. Not Klaus. James knew that immediately. The German was good but not great. Made the mistake of staying in one position too long. James relocated after his first shot. The German did not. James fired from his new position. The German never fired again. Day 5, 4 kills. Routine work by this point, if you can call killing routine. Maybe that was the problem. It was becoming routine. Mechanical, point, calculate, fire. Next target, day 6, rest day, relocated position because Germans had spotted them. Someone had seen muzzle flash, or maybe just gotten lucky with a guess. Either way, time to move. Total for 6 days, 21 confirmed kills. Canadian infantry advancing below would later report it was like God himself was on their side. Every time a German showed his head, he dropped. They never saw the shooter. Never heard the shots over the general noise of battle. Just saw the enemy falling. But here is what James remembered most about the Scheldt. Not the kills, the cold. It was October. Rain every day. Wind cutting across the flat water like razors. His fingers went numb inside his gloves. The scope fogged constantly. He had to breathe on it to clear it, then wait for it to warm up again before he could use it. The Lee-Enfield never failed. Not once. Through rain and cold and mud. The rifle worked, but James started to fail. On day 7, Bobby asked him a question while they were relocating. How many now? Total James did not answer for a long moment. Just kept walking, kept carrying T-1847, kept putting one foot in front of the other, then quietly. I stopped counting after 50. Why? Because if I count them, they become numbers. And if they are numbers, I start thinking of them as less than human. And that is when you become a monster. Bobby was quiet. They walked another 100 yards before he spoke. You are not a monster, James. You are ending this war one bullet at a time. Maybe, James said, or maybe I am just good at killing. That was the moment when James realized he was changing, and not in a good way. He was becoming something he did not want to be, something his grandfather would not recognize, something his father had warned him about without ever saying the words. He was becoming a professional killer. And the worst part, he was good at it. The Intelligence, November 2nd, 1944, Canadian Intelligence Headquarters, Antwerp, newly liberated. A captured German Hauptmann, a captain from the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, was being interrogated. He had been wounded in the leg during a retreat, left behind when his unit pulled out, found by Canadian scouts dehydrated and exhausted and broken. The intelligence officer asked routine questions: unit strength, defensive positions, minefields, officer names, the usual information gathering. Then, almost as an afterthought, tell me about your sniper operations. The Hauptmann laughed, bitter, defeated, the laugh of a man who has lost everything and found it funny in a dark way. Operations. We have no operations. We have nightmares. Explain. The Hauptmann leaned forward. You want to know about your Canadian snipers, I will tell you. They are not human. They are demons, shadows. We call them der unhörbare Tod, the inaudible death. There is one especially. The reports call him der Geist, the ghost. Young, American accent when captured soldiers overheard him. He killed 11 of my men in 3 days at Woensdrecht. 11. The intelligence officer stopped writing. But the worst part, we sent Zimmerman after him, our best. Olympic champion, 90 kills on the Eastern Front. Where is Zimmerman now? Last I heard, moving toward your positions. He has a team with him, 6 snipers, all from the Eastern Front. Their only mission is to kill Canadian snipers. Kill der Geist specifically. The intelligence officer immediately radioed forward positions. The message reached Captain Hughes 3 hours later. Hughes called James and Bobby in immediately. Morrison, we have confirmation. Klaus Zimmerman, the German sniper hunting you, is real. And he is not alone. He has a team, 6 men, all elite. Bobby spoke first. 6 men just for us. Hughes shook his head. Not just for you, for all Canadian snipers. But intelligence indicates Zimmerman is specifically focused on your sector. On you. James was quiet, then simply, good. Good, I am tired of looking over my shoulder. Let him come. Let us finish this. Thomas returns February 1945, Allied forward-based Netherlands-German border. James Morrison sat in a freezing tent cleaning Lee-Enfield T-1847 for what felt like the 1,000th time. The routine was comforting. Disassemble, clean, oil, reassemble, check the scope, test the bolt. Over and over, like prayer. 103 confirmed kills now. Official, countless more unconfirmed. He had stopped counting at 50, but the army kept counting for him. Bobby Chen had been hit 3 weeks earlier. Second time wounded, shrapnel from an artillery shell. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to get him evacuated to England. Stable, but done fighting. The war was over for Bobby. James was alone, working with temporary spotters who did not know him, did not understand his rhythm, did not trust him the way Bobby had. It was like dancing with strangers. Functional, but not comfortable. Then the tent flap opened. Jesus, Jimmy, you look like hell. James looked up. Thomas Morrison. 6 years older than when James had last seen him. Thinner. Shoulders still stiff from Dieppe wounds, he held it at an odd angle. But alive. Here. Real. James stood so fast he knocked over his cleaning kit. Oil and rags scattering. Thomas, they embraced. Brothers who had not seen each other since October 1942. 3 years and 4 months. A lifetime in war years. Thomas pulled back, looked at James. Really looked at him. Heard you became a legend, the ghost. Officers in London were talking about you. The American boy who kills Germans like he is shooting deer. James did not know what to say, did not know if that was a compliment or an accusation. Thomas continued, I was recovered enough to serve again. They will not let me fight, but I can spot. I volunteered for sniper section. Why? Because my little brother is about to do something incredibly stupid, and I am not letting him do it alone. James smiled. First real smile in months. How did you know? Because Captain Hughes briefed me. Final mission. Klaus Zimmermann, the German sniper who has been hunting you. Thomas sat down, poured coffee from a thermos. The coffee smelled like home, like their mother's kitchen, like a world that did not have war in it. They are sending you into Gok, German-held town. Klaus is there training new snipers. High Command wants him eliminated before he can rebuild German counter-sniper capability. I know. I am going tomorrow. Thomas nodded. I am going with you, Thomas. You are still injured, and you are my brother. End of discussion. They sat in silence for a moment. Brothers who had chosen the same war, the same fight, the same deadly profession. Then Thomas asked the question. How many what? How many men have you killed? James looked at his rifle. At T-1847, at the weapon that had been his companion for 2 years. His friend, his curse. 103 confirmed. Maybe 30 more unconfirmed. Thomas was quiet for a long time. You remember Dad's rule, 1 shot, 1 kill. No suffering, sir. James nodded. You kept it, Jimmy, every single one. You did not make them suffer. That counts for something. Does it? It has to. The final mission. February 18th, 1945. 0300 hours, outside Gok, Germany. James and Thomas moved through the darkness. No moon, overcast sky, cold that bit through every layer of clothing. They had infiltrated through Allied lines, crossed no man's land, slipped past German sentries who were cold and tired and not expecting infiltrators this close to the end of the war. 2 hours of moving slowly, carefully, invisibly. Every skill James had learned in training, every lesson from 2 years of combat, all of it focused on this moment. Thomas spotted for obstacles. James carried T-1847 40 rounds of ammunition and the knowledge that this might be his last mission. One way or another, it ended here. 0527 hours. They heard German voices, a patrol, 5 men, moving perpendicular to their position, talking in low voices about home and food and women. The same thing soldiers always talk about. James and Thomas froze, literally did not breathe. James could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel Thomas's presence beside him, could smell the German cigarette smoke. The patrol passed within 20 feet, kept going, did not see them. 0615 hours. They reached their observation position, a bombed-out warehouse 690 yards from the church where intelligence said Klaus was training snipers. They set up, waited for dawn, James checking and rechecking T-1847, Thomas scanning with binoculars, both of them silent. There was nothing left to say. 0643 hours. First light. That magical time when darkness turns to gray, then gray to color. Through the scope, James could see the church clearly. No movement yet, just old stone and broken windows and the scars of war. 0701 hours. A figure appeared in the bell tower. Bobby had taught James to identify snipers by how they moved. Snipers moved differently than regular soldiers. Slower, more deliberate, always checking angles, always aware of being watched. This figure moved like a sniper. Got him? James whispered. Thomas looking through binoculars. Range 690. Wind. James licked his finger, held it up, felt the cold bite on one side, 10 miles per hour, left to right. Thomas did the math in his head. 3 inches right. James adjusted the scope. 3 clicks. Put the crosshairs on the figure in the bell tower. Started to squeeze the trigger. Slow, smooth, like his grandfather had taught him. Then Thomas gasped. What movement? Left side. German patrol. They see us. James looked away from the scope. 6 German soldiers, 150 yards, running toward their position. Someone had spotted them, maybe seen muzzle flash from a previous position, maybe just gotten lucky. Thomas grabbed his rifle. Go, I will hold them. Thomas, no, take the shot. End this. That is why we came. James looked at his brother, at the Germans running toward them, at the figure in the bell tower, Klaus, who was now looking in their direction. He had maybe 10 seconds before everyone started shooting. Thomas, shoot the duel. James put the scope back to his eye, shut out everything else. The Germans, Thomas, the fear, all of it. This was what 3 years of training was for, what 2 years of combat had prepared him for. This moment, when everything else falls away and there is just you, your rifle, and your target. Deep breath, hold. The crosshairs settled on Klaus's center mass. James squeezed. The Lee-Enfield kicked, that familiar push against his shoulder. Like an old friend. Through the scope. Klaus staggered, hit, but not down. James cycled the bolt. Smooth, automatic, muscle memory, fired again. Klaus went down. Behind him, Thomas grunted. James spun around. Thomas was on the ground, blood spreading across his chest. Dark, arterial, bad. No. Thomas, more German soldiers appearing. A dozen now. The patrol, plus reinforcements. James grabbed Thomas, dragged him toward cover. Thomas was heavy, heavier than James remembered. Or maybe James was just tired. Did you get him? Thomas asked, blood bubbling from his lips. Yeah, I got him. Good. Thomas smiled, blood on his teeth. Then it was worth it. You are not dying. Stay with me. Thomas gripped James's hand, squeezed. His hand was cold. Too cold. You have to go. Leave me. Get out. I am not leaving you. Yes, you are. Thomas squeezed harder, because if you stay, we both die. If you go, you can tell, Mom, I did not die for nothing. Thomas, promise me. Promise me you will go home. Promise me you will have a life after this. James was crying now, tears he had not shed since he was 12 years old. I promise. Good. Thomas let go of his hand, picked up his rifle with his good arm. Now go ghost. Be a ghost. James ran. Behind him, gunfire, Thomas shooting, keeping the Germans back, buying time with his life. Then silence. James kept running. Did not look back. Could not look back. 2 hours later, he reached Allied lines, collapsed, and wept. Thomas Morrison died holding off 12 German soldiers so his brother could escape. He killed 4 before they overwhelmed his position. He never surrendered. He died like a Morrison. Fighting, the letter April 1945, Allied forces secured Gok, found Klaus Zimmermann's body in the church bell tower. 2 shots, center mass, textbook. In his pocket, they found a letter, written in English, addressed to the Canadian ghost. It was passed through intelligence channels, eventually reached James. He opened it with shaking hands. Dear opponent, it began. If you are reading this, I am dead, and you have won our duel. I write this because I wish for you to understand. I do not hate you. We are both professionals, both hunters. You hunt for your country, I hunt for mine. I have studied your work. You are exceptional. Perhaps the finest sniper I have faced in this war, and I have faced many. Your shots are clean, quick, humane. You do not torture. You do not make them suffer. This is the mark of a true hunter. I have a daughter, Greta. She is 8 years old. If I do not return, please know that I fought honorably, and I hope you did as well. There is no glory in what we do, only necessity. May you find peace after this war. With respect, Oberleutnant Klaus Zimmermann. Postscript. Enclosed is a photograph of Greta. I ask only that you remember. Every man you killed had someone who loved him, as does every man you saved. Inside the envelope was a photograph. A blonde girl smiling holding a doll. 8 years old. Greta Zimmermann. James looked at that photograph for a long time, then folded it carefully and kept it for the rest of his life. Home, May 8, 1945. Warrens in Europe, James Morrison returned to Montana in July 1945. The train ride across America felt unreal, like traveling through a dream, cities untouched by war, people who did not flinch at loud noises, children playing in streets that had never seen tanks or heard artillery. His mother was 63 now, frail, but alive. She held him when he walked through the door, did not say anything at first, just held him. Then quietly. Both my sons went to war. Only one came home. But at least one came home. James brought Lee-Enfield No.4 with him. allowed to keep it as a war trophy. He mounted it above the fireplace in the room that had been his as a boy. He never fired it again. After the years passed, James worked as a hunting guide in the Rockies, taught clients how to track, how to shoot, how to respect what they killed. But he never hunted himself. "I have killed enough," he told one client who asked why. In 1948, Bobby Chen visited from Vancouver, brought his sister Margaret. She was beautiful, smart, understood James's silences. They married 6 months later. Bobby was best man. At the wedding, Bobby gave a toast. "To the best shot I ever saw and the best friend I ever had. May you find peace." When the Korean War broke out in 1950, the Army requested James return as instructor. He declined. "I have done my part. Let younger men fight." In 1967, Thomas Morrison was posthumously awarded the Military Cross for his actions at Gok. James traveled to Ottawa to receive it, stood at his mother's grave with the medal. She had died in 1964, still believing both her sons were heroes. "I am sorry I came home, and you did not," James Holmes said to the earth. In 1982, James Morrison, age 62, sat on his porch in Montana. His grandson Tommy, age 7, named after Thomas, played in the yard. The boy ran up. "Grandpa, Dad says you were a war hero. Is that true?" James looked at him. "No, son. I was just a man who did what needed to be done." "What did you do?" "I protected people. That is all." The boy ran off to play. James reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn photograph. Greta Zimmerman, age 8, holding a doll. She would be 45 now, probably had children, maybe grandchildren. He wondered if she ever learned what her father did in the war. He wondered if she hated Americans. He hoped not, because hate is what started the war, and understanding is what ends it. The end. That evening, Tommy asked one more question. "Grandpa, why do you keep that old rifle above the fireplace?" James looked at Lee-Enfield No. 1847. 40 years since he had held it. 40 years since it had saved his life 103 times. 40 years since it had taken 103 lives. He walked over, took it down, felt the familiar weight. This rifle is a reminder of what he handed it to Tommy. Carefully, safely. Feel that weight. That is the weight of responsibility. When you hold a weapon, any weapon, you have the power to take life. And with that power comes responsibility to use it wisely, honorably, only when necessary. This rifle taught me that every life matters, every single one. The 103 men I killed, they had families, daughters, sons, mothers, just like me. I did not hate them, and I hope they did not hate me. We were just men on different sides doing what we thought was right. Tommy looked at the rifle with new eyes. "Is that why you kept it? To remember them?" "Yeah. And to make sure I never forget the cost of war." He hung the rifle back above the fireplace. James Morrison died in 1994 at age 74 in his sleep. Bobby Chen spoke at his funeral. "James was the finest shot I ever saw. But more than that, he was the finest man. He understood that being deadly is not about being heartless. It is about being precise, professional, respectful. He killed 103 men to save thousands. And he carried the weight of those 103 men every single day for the rest of his life. That is what made him a hero. Not the killing, the carrying. Lee-Enfield No. 1847 now rests in a military museum in Montana. Beside it, a placard reads, "This rifle in the hands of Sergeant James Morrison, Canadian Army American volunteer, accounted for 103 confirmed enemy kills during World War II. It never jammed, never failed, and represented the best of what America and Canada stood for. Precision, reliability, and honor." So the next time you hear someone say they do not make them like they used to remember, they are not just talking about rifles, they are talking about men. Men like James Morrison. Men who understood that true strength is not about being the toughest. It is about being the most disciplined, the most honorable, the most human even in the most inhuman circumstances. That is the story of the quiet death. If this story moved you, share it with someone from the greatest generation. They remember these days. They remember these values. Let them know we have not forgotten.